A very happy new year. Welcome to Bistro Buzz Conversations with Chitapa Basu. Bistro Buzz is all about buzzing. And when people join Bistro Buzz, conversations happen just naturally. These conversations could be about the arts, about culture, about lifestyle, about entertainment, about literature, books, poetry, blogs, or they can just be random reflections. And then the discussions begin, the debates and the live talk shows. Bistro Bus hosts a lot of inspirational guests. These people, they come on Bistro Bus and they tell us some really exciting and interesting things. And they always leave us food for thought. Basically, all of us are having a lot of fun at Bistro Bus. So why don't you just join the party? All you have to do is click on facebook.com Chuttapabasu20 and look out for Bistro Bus. And now let's go on to the event of the evening and join Manjari Prabhu in the wild talk. Manjari Prabhu is an author and the founder director of 2 international festivals. She is also acknowledged as a pioneer among women writers of the mystery genre in India and is the first female Indian mystery writer to be published outside India. She has been labeled the Desi Agatha Christie, and recently Shashi Tharoor compared her writing to Dan Brown's. Manjari holds a doctorate in communication science and has written 16 books in a variety of genres, including children's fiction till date. She has directed 200 infotainment programs for children and young adults. Her unpublished novel has been adapted into a Hindi feature film titled Kuch Dil Ne Kaha for NFDC. Her novels, Cosmic Clues, was selected as the killer book by Independent Mystery Booksellers of America, and The Astral Alibi was honored as a notable book by the Kiriyama Prize. Manjari has founded the Pune International Literature Festival, which has put Pune on the map of art and culture. She has also founded the International Festival of Spiritual India, Humanity and Wisdom, the first of its kind globally. Organized in Pune, it has been running for 2 years now and has participants from all over the world. Manjari wears many hats, and not the least of them is her work for animals that need shelter and rescue. She has been very active in caring for strays and finding homes for them. And now let's welcome this fantastic lady, Manjari Prabhu. Welcome, Manjari, to Bistro Buzz.
Thank you so much, Chuttapa. That was really sweet of you, and thank you so much for inviting me here today. I'm really looking forward to our talk.
So are we, and it's a wild talk. So I'm going to
give wild
questions and expect wild answers from you.
I can't wait to begin.
Now, you've had 26 years in publishing. That's a lot. I mean, that's quarter of a century, in fact. So how has your journey been? How has it all been? What is this world all about? Tell us.
Well, yeah, so it's 26 years, but it's not 26 continuous years, because in between I focused on my other things, on my career in, television production and things like that. So yes, on the whole, grossly 26 years. How has it been? It has been very enlightening. It has been there's so much learning in this. When I started out, writers were treated as writers, not marketeers. We had to write our books and step away. When I came back after a gap of, I think, 7 years, the world had totally changed. Writers were now expected to promote their books, go all out. Writing was just a small part of the entire publishing process.
Very sad. Very sad.
Yes. So it took me a while to get adjusted to this, because I was still the old school. I kept thinking, I've written my book, the publisher has to take this forward now. And I realized, sadly, that's not the case. And there were youngsters, people so much younger than me who were racing. They were in a rat race to get books published, no matter what, no matter how. And yes, it was a learning process for me. And I realized that if I had to stay in this if I had to continue writing the kind of books I wanted to write, I had to really up my game. Yeah, so it's been a fantastic journey. I'm not going to say that I'm sorry for any bit of it. I just love every book of mine that I've written so far, and I feel I feel that really books choose you. If you're destined to write a certain book, you will write no matter what. If they're destined to come out in the world, they will come out in the world no matter what. So I really believe in this whole, I believe that, my dharma, my path in this world is to write books, and it's to entertain people through my books. Yes.
Beautiful, beautiful. I mean, I love that no matter what anybody else does, the books will be born if they're destined to.
Yes.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Now, you are right. Today, I mean, you said it's a rat race, but today I think there are as many authors as published books. That's the number of authors and books that are there in the market. Somehow, writing and publishing a book has become a must-have. Like you should have a tick on your CV. What are your thoughts on this whole, this whole thought process that writing and publishing a book is more of a fashion rather than a calling? So what do you say about that?
Certainly, it's changed. Like I said, the writing ethics have changed tremendously.
I completely agree.
I feel totally that there are two kinds of writers, basically. Those who are born writers. I went to like your page, and I saw on your page you'd written that you're a writer because there are these things, the thoughts in your mind, or there are stories in your mind which are craving to come out. Okay, you're a born writer. That's what the feeling is when you want to write. There's something inside you which is bursting to come out. So that's your calling. You have to write. On the other hand, there are writers with acquired talents. Okay, they acquire the talents because, like we said, they need it on their CV. They want to use the tag as an embellishment in their life, or like an accessory in their life, or to feel great, or to brand themselves. So there are these two kind of writers. I'm, of course, partial to the first kind, but the second kind I feel is much smarter today. I'll give you a simple litmus test. If I were to give you, say, 10,000 rupees and say, Shutapa, write a book that you want to write, you've been wanting to write all your life, sit in a room, sit alone, write it, but there's no certainty of it getting published. But here's the 10,000, just write it. On the other hand, I give you, I'm going to say I'm giving you 10 lakh rupees. And Shutapa, find a WhatsApp, form a WhatsApp group and teach mathematics or science or any subject of your choice. And here's the 10 lakh rupees. I'm sure most of the people who are people with calling would probably choose the first one, because that's what they want to do from the bottom of their heart. But the majority today will definitely choose the second one. Why? Because they're smart enough to use the 10 lakhs. They will form the group. They will, assign that role to someone to teach whatever, write on the side, promote themselves, use that money. Now, that's the kind of, how should I call it, publishing smartness or street smartness that you need today. But those are different kind of writers, and you have to see which slot you really fit in. So, yes, I feel that marketing has taken over our lives like, in such a huge way that writing has become fashionable, because how else would you call yourself? I mean, I don't know how much can you just call yourself a writer? You have to have more than just, what should I say? It's certainly not, it's your oxygen. Those who want to write, it's like breathing. It's breathing for them. And the other half is using it as a fashion tag. Yes, I totally agree with that.
And what do you think about this tag which says bestseller on Amazon?
Oh, wow.
What do you think about that tag?
Shutapa, I'll give you a simple answer to this. I'm not going to go into too many details, but the simple answer, I've never called myself a bestseller author for the simple reason that I may be misunderstood. So I think that says it all.
You are so right. You are so right. There are people who will buy their own books, and then they call themselves a bestseller. I mean, I totally agree with you. That tag is so,
that tag is an avoid tag now. Totally. I mean, I make sure that tag doesn't appear on my books. I don't want to be known as a bestseller author. I make sure that I'm not being known, because it has all the wrong connotations to it now. Absolutely. It's not a tag that you covet anymore, even if you really are a bestseller author. That's a different story. But
I completely agree on that. Yeah. So, you just spoke about marketing and how authors are spending so much on marketing.
Yes.
Do you think now books have become a vehicle for PR, for publicity, for, And so how do you think a book should be marketed? I mean, you just spoke about two kinds of writers. Can we have a middle path? Can we have somebody who has a calling as well as, tries to market? So what are your thoughts? How do you think a book ought to be marketed?
Well, like you rightly said, people are spending lakhs of rupees, literally lakhs of rupees on marketing. Okay, they're spending more than they earn, because obviously books are barely being read in India. I mean, let's be honest about this. Bestseller tags in out of the country. I mean, in the US and UK, it means millions of copies. In India, a bestseller tag would probably mean about maximum 10,000 copies. So when you think of the amounts earned from it and the amount spent on marketing, somewhere the mathematics doesn't match at all. So who spends lakhs of rupees despite not earning it back enough? Those people who have lots of money in hand, those people who want to brand themselves as more than writers, those people who are writing for a very different reason. So what was the question? Shuttapa, are you there or are you gone?
Yeah. I'm very much there. I'm very much there.
Okay, I thought you anyway. So yes, so those are the kind of writers. Having said that, okay, marketing has become very essential today. Like I said, when I started off, I was old school. I thought publishers should take over. But today, when there are hundreds and hundreds and thousands of authors in a bookstore, when you see so many names, why would your name stand out? There has to be some reason why your name why should a reader go in and pick up your book? And you have to give the reader a reason to pick up your book. And that reason is the part of marketing. You have to give them the reason. And that is why marketing is important today. And well, you have to go with the times. I don't mean that you have to spend lakhs of rupees, I mean, your dad's or your husband's or your own rupees to establish yourself as a brand. But basically, just to get your book read today, you need to put in marketing. I think it's, there's a time when I would have said this is really unfair because writers barely earn anything. But the economics, the dynamics of the whole thing has changed so much that if you want to write nowadays, you have to be a marketer. I mean, it's a plain and simple understanding, and you have to come into this with understanding that this is how it works.
I completely agree. I mean, marketing has become now a part, and we might as well accept it. We can't sit in a corner and write even if we want to. We can't do that. We have to come out.
There are still people who do it, who still believe that this is my role, I'm going to write and all that. But honestly, in the long run, unless you're a brilliant, super brilliant writer who's going to leave a mark forever and become a legend, I don't think that's going to be possible. You need even to reach your reader, you need this much hyped existence in your life, and that's marketing.
Absolutely. And I think I would say a lot of thanks to social media, which has helped actually.
Absolutely. No? Social media is the biggest boon that authors could have ever, met, because without that, imagine paying, I mean, of course, even the reviews in the newspapers are mostly paid for, or even the write-ups. We all know what happens, so much exchange of money happens today to get even a little bit of news item. So
absolutely,
getting a huge platform across the world, and not even in your state, not even in your country, across the world is a boon. And I think authors have to use it left, right, and center without overdoing it, of course. But yeah, I think it's a great boon.
I totally agree. Now let's come to the fact that you are the mystery writer of, the era. So you have been called the Desi Agatha Christie, and Shashi Tharoor has compared you to Dan Brown. Detective fiction. Let me ask you a question. Detective fiction has two kinds of detectives. You have the professional detective like Hercule Poirot or Sherlock Holmes, and you have the homegrown ones, like Miss Marple. Which one do you prefer in your stories?
Shuttapa, first I'm going to comment on that other comment of yours. Desi Agatha Christie, Indian Agatha Christie, and Dan Brown has found his match. Okay, I'm extremely flattered with these comparisons and everything. But I'll tell you something. When I started writing, that tag was given to me of Agatha Christie was given to me in 2004. Tell me, which was the other Indian mystery writer at that point that I could be compared to? There was no one.
No, nobody. In fact,
exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. So that's what I'm saying. That the sheer fact that I'm compared to someone, a foreigner, means that there was no Indian equivalent. Okay, and the same applies even for Dan Brown. Even at this stage today, after so many of us writing, we still don't have these huge writers or writers who have put in those many years of their careers. So I feel that was, apart from my writing, which I'm assuming was good, and that's why it was compared. But apart from that, the sheer lack of someone, an equivalent to be compared, over the years, I think that whole, how should I say, that void has still not been filled. And I feel today that it's high time people said, Manjari Prabhu of USA, Manjari Prabhu of Britain. I think that's the tag I'm craving for now, because I've put in so many years of my life. I've got 17 books. It's high time people said not Indian Agatha Christie, but American Manjari Prabhu or British Manjari Prabhu. I think that's what I'm craving now. And I would thank you for asking me this question. It gives me a chance to say this, but that's what I now like.
Right. Besides Manjari, I also want to say that you have held the banner high for women mystery writers, whether abroad or whether in India, because most publishers, a lot of readers believe that male writers, it's the bastion of male writers, but it's not so, and you proved it.
No. Yes.
So,
absolutely.
I'm sure you have a lot of followers. Absolutely. Writing in the same genre, I'm quite sure. But you are the one who has actually shown the path. So, I would say, thank you so much for that.
I think, so commenting on that, just recently in one of the sessions that I participated in, one of my colleagues said, I haven't written as many books as you because I'm younger than you. Okay, I'm not old enough. So I thought that comment was so funny. I mean, you don't have to be old enough, as old as me, to come to my number of books. You can still write. I mean, there are youngsters writing. I mean, almost everyone I know has written 14 books and 15 books. Now I've written only 17 books. Okay, so age has got nothing to do with it. If you want to write, you can write. So there is this sarcasm that I haven't written those many books, or you were born at the right time, right place, right everything. There's so many other things that go with it. And I've been told this, but that apart, I think I'm really delighted that I was there at the right time. I took the opportunity, and the muse was there to lead me, and destination, like I said, destiny always plays a role in it.
True.
And coming to your second question,
what
detectives.
kind of
Yeah. So, Hercule Poirot is my favorite. Okay, I like him a lot, and I like the way he's built. Sherlock Holmes and Miss Marple. Well, yes. So what I really like is a combination of all three. Okay, I like Sonia Samant from the Cosmic Clues and Astral Lullaby, or Ray Parker from my Destination Thriller series. Both are very earthy people. They are aware of their flaws. At the same time, they have extremely good observation skills. They are blessed with a technique. For example, Sonia knows astrology, and Ray Parker has psychic visions. So I like this mystical element attached to my detectives, which take them away from being normal. So they are aspirational characters, although being early. So that's the kind of detective I like.
I like that. And let me pick up from that. Astrology. You have a lot of astrology in your books. Now, astrology is not a science. It's not deemed a science as yet. And I know that your mother was also an astrologer.
She
is. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I want to ask you a question that, is it that you use astrology because it helps you to exploit, fictionally exploit the entire subject area? Or is it because you're a staunch believer in astrology? Which is the reason?
Like you said, my mom is an astrologer, and I am certainly a staunch believer of astrology. And astrology is deemed a Vedic science. It may not be science in the in the world, but as a Vedic form of expression, it is deemed a science. Having said that, there was a reason why I started writing this series. It's a long story. I think I've told it several times, but I'll tell you shortly. My mom is pretty renowned, and a lot of people come, to her for consultations. So there was once this Bollywood director who came to her. They were sitting in a kind of a group. It was like a party, and he said, I have this real urgent need to ask you something. And luckily she remembered his horoscope. And he said, can you please tell me when I will have a son? Okay. And she just kind of looked at the horoscope in her mind, and she said, do you want to go somewhere private? Because I want to respond to this. And he said, no, these are all friends. Just talk freely here. She said, okay, well, your horoscope shows that you already have a son. It's the only thing is that you cannot claim him as yours. And that was shocking, because he didn't expect it. He didn't expect her to, see through his secrets, the skeletons in the cupboard. And that was shocking for him. And when I heard the story, it was shocking for me too. And I realized at that point, this was in 2000, maybe 3 or 1, when I realized that astrology in its entirety is a gift for us. It is horoscopes, especially Indian astrology, which is so precise, and they're all planetary positions, and it's mathematics. All these combinations.
Yes, I was about to say that. Yes,
and if you have
they use the science, whether it is the planetary or it is the numerology, they do use the science.
Yes. And so if you know how to read this, it's like an X-ray. You can definitely tell the character of a person. You can definitely predict lots of things. Like for example, my mom had predicted when Lady Diana and Charles got married way back, she had announced in the newspapers that this would end in divorce. It's not going to. And at that point, all the astrologers also said, God, how could you even announce this? It's such a blatant lie and all that. She said, no, just wait and watch. And finally, when this happened, when the divorce happened, people came back to her remembering so many years ago you had predicted this. So you can definitely predict characters. You can predict how your husband, wife is going to look. You can predict when you're going to get married. You can predict, there's so many things you can predict, provided you know how to read the horoscope. So that's exactly what happens in the Cosmic Clues and Astro Lullaby. Sonia uses astrology as a map, as a guidance. That's not her deductive. She doesn't use all her deductive skills and through the horoscope. She uses all her deductive skills, and when she reaches a dead end, that's when she uses the horoscope as a map. So that's how I thought that, and astrology had never been used in literature ever before, especially as a crime solving tool. And that's how I wondered, why have we not ever used astrology to at least find out if this person has criminal tendencies? That would really help us, whether you're having partnerships, whether you're getting married to somebody. There's so many ways in which you can use a horoscope. And that's what I've done in the books.
There is a interesting question, which is by Sonia. What would you say about actors becoming authors? Yeah, that's a really bomb. Yeah. What do you say about that?
No, so when I look at actors becoming authors, I see two things. One is, of course, that they've got a body of work. Especially somebody like, say, Amitabh Bachchan writes his own autobiography.
Absolutely.
I understand that there's a learning experience there, and that story should be told, and all of us should listen. That's one kind of actors becoming authors. There is the other kind who just want to ride on. They have nothing to do. Probably their career is faded out, and the next step is probably to write about what they've done. That's the second kind, I feel. Now, between the two, obviously the first one is the preferred choice, but the second one is now booming. Okay, it is because you're barely 50 and then you say, hey, I have a story to tell, and then that's my autobiography. I mean, all of us in our own ways have experiences to tell. I mean, I felt like writing my autobiography for years, but I felt, what should I really write in it? I'm not yet ready. And similarly, all of us have, stories, experiences, fantastic journeys that we can talk about. Why just actors? But actors are chosen because of the celebrity quotient, the celebrity tag behind it, the so-called celebrity tag. And publishers feel that, well, if actors will write, their books will be sold. Ultimately, it's sales that counts. This whole game is of sales. So one which way or the other, they want books to sell. So I guess that's why actors are now becoming authors.
I completely agree about this. And let us just say hello to Anupama, Shobha, Madhya, and so many more people. Priya, Orani, they're all here to listen to us, and they're all saying that it's lovely listening to you and Manjari. So great.
Thank you.
Lovely to have you all here. Now, let me ask you something a little different. Your destination thrillers are a class apart. And you travel to a new destination every time, and build a thriller based on that. So you've done Salzburg, Austria, you've done Sweden. What's the next? I mean, why did this idea come to you to have these destination thrillers?
Yeah. So, okay. So I've always traveled through my books. Okay. I started writing.
And made your readers travel. Your readers also travel.
Yes, of course, because I want to introduce them to different parts of the world. Well, it's armchair traveling. All of us know about that. But personally, me as a person, I love traveling. I think I've learned a lot of things through my travels, and I feel that travel really liberates you in many ways. It teaches you lots of things. So my love for traveling and my love for writing had to come together at some point.
Manjari, are you there? Uh, Manjari, I think we've lost you. We've lost Manjari, I think, for some
Okay, I'm
time.
back. I'm back.
And she's coming back. Yeah, you're there. Yes.
Okay, yeah, I lost my, sorry about that. So, so in my second book that was based in Panhala, Kolhapur. So, no, that was in 1994. So since then, I've been involving Indian locales in all my novels. In 2011, I wrote The Cavern-Side Conspiracy. That's when my destination started changing. So Cavern-Side Conspiracy takes place in 48 hours from Pune to Germany to London and back to Pune, all in 48 hours. Then I wrote a young adult mystery book, like a young adult detective, called The Gypsies at Noel's Retreat. So Noel's Retreat was in Giverny, where a young all-girl rock band group goes there, and they solve a mystery in Paris and Giverny. So I've always been fascinated with other locations, and I've always wanted to include them. Coming to The Trail of Four, which is where I dedicatedly thought I need to write destination thrillers, wherein it's not just the backdrop of the story, but they become characters themselves, and there are clues in the backdrop. So my husband and I traveled in 1998. You know, we did a backpacking, you know, like everybody does. We did a backpacking tour in Europe, and we went to Salzburg, and there was this Schloss Leopoldskron. That's where the film Sound of Music is shot. So they usually take the Sound of Music tour. They take you around the lake, and it's a private hotel, so you can't really go in. So I saw it from a distance, and I saw that palace, and I was very fascinated by it. I said, "Oh my God, I want to go in." Okay, but that's about it. 2 years later, I mean, that seed had been sown. What I'm trying to tell you is that I wrote the book in 2014, but the journey began in 1998. Okay, 2 years later, Salzburg Global Seminar, which owns that palace and holds these seminars there, invited me for a session on adapting books to films. And that's when I really entered that palace. See how destiny works. It was a longing, that seed was sown, and then I was automatically invited to the same place where I felt I wanted to base a book. The moment I stepped into the palace, I knew that I will come back and write a story here. Okay, I just felt it. However, it took me 12 long years, you know, because that was in 2001, I think. Along the way, life happens, you know, I wrote other books and all that, but that real desire for me to go back there, it's almost like the destination calls you. You know, that's what's happened to me. My destinations call me, and that's why I'm calling them destination thrillers. And in 2012, I said, it's high time I go back and write that novel, which is craving to be born in that destination. So I wrote to the Salzburg Global Seminar, and then they said, okay, come back, you know, come and write here. They were very sweet. So I went there and I stayed there for 20 days. And from there was no looking back. I stayed there. I wrote. I knew what I wanted to write there the moment I stepped in. The novel just came to me. It was amazing, the whole experience, because I had to learn the history of the Schloss, history of Salzburg, base clues there. I don't know if you've read The Trail of Four, but you'll understand that it was a difficult book to write, because when you write about your own country and your own culture, it's much different from when you write about other cultures and other countries. I didn't want it to be like some Indian coming here and writing about our country. I wanted it to be a novel, an international novel, written like an insider. And I had to work very hard to, you know, bridge that gap between a non-Austrian writing book or a non-English. So it was a very, very exciting journey, and I loved every bit of it. But since I had started it, so that book basically is about, you know, the Schloss, where the bishop's heart, you know, the person who owned the Leopold, I forgot the other half of the name. Anyway, so Leopold who had created that Schloss. When he died, his heart was buried in the chapel in the Schloss, but his body was buried in the cathedral in the old town. And the whole story starts when that heart is stolen. The 300-year-old heart is stolen. Okay, at that point, I didn't realize that this heart was going to connect me to my next novel, which is Voice of the Runes. So when I finished
Okay.
writing the trailer for, when I finished writing the trailer for, I said, now what next? Because it was obviously that Ray Parker was going to move from one European destination to another. And
Mm.
his last book would be when he came to India, because he had an Indian father he didn't get along with. Okay, so that would be the last book in the series. So I was wondering what to write next when my friend Terry, who lives in Sweden, said, why don't you come here? You know, there's fantastic, like Scandinavian dark novels that are part of our history, and all that she told me. And I said, let me think, because she'd come here and stayed with me, so she wanted me to come and stay with her. So then my sister Lena said, let's look what's there, and she's my co-researcher. And then we looked it up, and she discovered the runes, and
Okay.
I said, oh my God, that sounds really fascinating. So then we looked it up, and I realized, yes, this is what I want to do. I want to write about the runes in Sweden, in the 350-year-old Lund University. And so we went there. But what I did not know then at that point was that in the cathedral, which I chose, I don't know if you've read The Voice of Runes, but this whole climax happens in the cathedral. The cathedral where we went to, to base the novel, there was a placard outside there which said, the heart of another somebody was buried in the chapel there.
Oh my
And
God.
and I was so taken aback. I said, I had no idea that buried human hearts were leading me on a trail of destination thrillers. So you see, there is more to, the destination that calls you. The thrillers are taking place on their own. So I may have started off with some intention in mind, but there was certainly an unconscious, some spirit somewhere that was leading me onto the destination thrillers. And that's why I keep saying that the books that have to be born will be born no matter what.
So where is
Next one.
another heart calling you? Which destination?
I don't know if I should tell you this because the book's still being pitched, and I don't know who's going to publish it also, but it's called The Mystery of the Snow Queen. I can tell you that much. And it takes
No
place on
Queen.
Snow Queen. Yes, Mystery of the Snow Queen. I can tell you that it takes place on the backdrop of a Christmassy Bavarian castles and Bavarian landscape. So that's all
Wow.
I can tell you. But so when I went there, I did not know again that there was a buried human heart there too, and that was something I
Imagine
discovered. It is just too much. It's what are the
you.
chances of buried human hearts? It's not even a common thing in Europe. Okay, so it's not as if every cathedral has a buried human heart. It's not that. It's just that the places I go to have buried human hearts of kings, and I'm like, what
It's just
is it leading to? Yeah,
fascinating. It's
it is
fascinating. I
really
mean, just
fascinating.
your story itself is a story, Manjari. I mean,
Yes, yeah.
what fascination. Lovely.
I
Beautiful.
Thank
Beautiful.
you.
Now, let me come to another foray of yours, which
Yeah.
is into the children's fiction, children's book. Your two books already down on this. One is a mystery, one is an animal tale. Tell us now the whys and hows of these books, and what do you think in the future about writing these kind of books or writing in this genre?
Well, so Shrutapa, I've said this time and time again that I started writing because of Enid Blyton. I was as a child, all
Right.
of us have devoured her books, and
Absolutely,
I
absolutely.
not only devoured them, I thought I was Enid Blyton reborn, because
Ah,
those books resonated with me so much. I felt that if I had to write books, I would write them exactly like this. And somehow, she really pushed me into writing, because I knew then when I was 7 years old that I would be a writer, and I wanted to be a writer like Enid Blyton, not because of the kind of books she wrote, but because of the kind of uh, a place she made created in my heart and in my memories and in my head. And I said, if I want to really live on, and somebody in Anupama Jain's, I think, chat, I said this, I'm actually seeking immortality through my books, because that's what Enid Blyton is. She's immortal. We grew up as children reading her books. Now she is immortal, because no matter where I go and no matter how old I am, I'm going to always attribute my writing to her. She has become immortal. Similarly, I felt even at that age that I want to have the same kind of reverential place as an author in somebody else's memory, because that's how our DNA passes on. By the way, I hope you know that memories pass on through our DNAs to generations and generations. So
true.
if
Yes.
you live on in somebody's memory through your characters, you're actually immortal. And that's how I realized that my target is always going to be children. But because I couldn't write for children all these years, I knew that at some point I would go there. This book particularly, the Mystery at Malabar Cottage, was actually my first book as a child. I just brushed it up and I gave it to Reader Mania, Dipakar, and they were kind, yes. But the Mittu, the Adventures of Mittu, which is right here, I'm going to show it because I just got it today, and it's not, yeah, okay.
And what a cover! Beautiful,
it is a beautiful cover. It's a beautiful cover. I love it. I'm in love with the book too. Not just because it's mine, but because I just love it. And I wrote this, so there are 13 stories in it, and I wrote them 25 years ago for a children's newspaper, one story at a time. Okay. That is the time that book was born, and I just kept it there. And I said, and however, even if the book is targeted at children, actually, it's a book like Little Prince. It's meant for everyone to read. There's always something to take away from the book. And I hope you can read it and tell me how you like it. But I had always decided that children are going to be my goals, because they're like clean slates. You can write on them. They're like, you can sculpture them out, out of molds. There's so much scope in passing on your values and everything to the kids, not just through teaching and through, through books that teach, but through fiction. I mean, we really underrate fiction in passing the values on to. And I think so many of my values I've learned from simple Enid Blyton books, where she talks about the land of far beyond, where she talks about, the pilgrim's journey. She's converted into that. There's so many values that I've learned from from Enid Blyton books. And I feel I want to have the same kind of the role that I want to play in the lives of children in the future. I think I want to continue writing for children, along with, of course, the adult writing.
Beautiful. I totally agree. I mean, the values that we learn as a child, they remain with us. And and stories are the best way to teach it. Definitely not the classroom. It's the stories which teach you actually.
Today's children books, from what I've seen so far, rather one of the reasons why I thought it was time to bring out Mystery at Malabar Cottage was because most of the books are trying to teach so much, in the guise of easy language or whatever, not even fiction. Just, there's so many ways that history is taught and science is taught through books and all for children books. It's all welcome. It's all, well and good. But where is pure entertainment? Where the child should connect with the book and say, hey, I want to be a writer, just because of the sheer fun of reading a book. And I think that's what I want to create in children. And I feel that there's a big space in Indian children writing where this pure fun is missing.
I agree. I mean, reading should be for fun. It should be for fun. Yes. And only when it's for fun does it also have an impact. Otherwise, it becomes a part of, education or teaching.
Exactly. And not everything is about education. Why must we always teach? Why must we always, let them learn? Preach. I mean, they have preach, whatever. Why must we always do that? Just let them have fun through the books, and then they will, of course, gather the values along the way that are inculcated through the books and the situations in the books and the mystery stories. I think mystery format is the best format ever created to teach values. It's like they're motivational books where good always wins over evil. They are books where you can they encompass all kinds of problems in them, which are all resolved in the end. They teach you that no matter what happens in life, all's well that ends well. I mean, that's mystery books for you. We really undervalue, mystery fiction in this world. They are the best form of teachers.
I agree, Manjari. Now let's come to another part of your life. You are a founder director of 2 festivals, not 1, 2 festivals. And one of them is, of course, the Pune International Literature Festival, which has put Pune on the map of art and culture. Now, it's very tough to organize a literature festival, but you have done it year after year with poise and tenacity. Once a festival ends, I'm very sure that you must be reflecting on it. So tell me one thing that inspires you to again have the festival next year, organize it. What is it?
Yeah, I think I'm foolish. I'm stupid. I think I'm mad to want to do it year after year, because when I'm doing it for those 3-4 months, I'm like, what poise are you talking about? There's no poise in it. There's just a wild way of wanting to get it done with. The kind of people you deal with, the kind of there's so many issues, so much in a festival. To kind of get it all together is not a joke. And I keep wondering, why am I doing this? What the hell am I doing? 4 months, I can easily do focus on my writing. This is a thankless job. It's a totally thankless job. I would not advise anybody who wants to be thanked for this should not go into it. It's a thankless job. But then why do I do it? Okay, very simple. I do it because firstly, I started off because I realized that being an author, I was very rarely, not rarely, I was never called to any lit fest. Despite having, being, like I said, the first mystery writer, blah, 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 all that. Despite that, I was
Very
never
strange.
invited.
Very
Never,
strange.
never. Yeah, and I realized that literature festivals have cliques. They invite a certain kind of people. They invite whatever. That there is a north-south divide. There's a north-center-south divide. There's a north-south, east-west-south divide. And I'm thinking, what's happening? I mean, and where are all the authors? And is it only for celebrities? So I had all these questions in my mind, number one. Number two, I always felt that Pune deserved Lit Fest. It's the Oxford of the East. It's the, we call it the Mahir Ghar of education, like it's the, the seat of education. And I said, we don't have a literature festival. So all that together made me and my team, we started this festival. But what made me continue it? First 2 years were a nightmare. We had no money. We put in our own money, and people used to think I'm stupid because here people were spending crores of rupees, on a festival, and I was putting in my money to do a festival, and all for what? To what end? But I realized that, as a child, I always wanted to be a healer. That was my goal. I felt that I wanted to heal people, and I couldn't become a healer for several reasons, or a doctor for that matter, because I am very scared of blood, and blood puts me off. But I wanted to be a healer, and I always felt I wanted to heal people's pain. And I felt that there was another way of healing people, and that is through literature. And I felt the more and more people read books and more people interact with arts and all, it's going to be a balm on people's day-to-day, traumas and ups and downs and heavers and everything. And I felt that this was a must for society. That was one of the reasons I continue doing it. Secondly, I continue doing it because I feel writers need a platform to meet their readers. It is the platform to meet readers, if not to meet the readers, to create new readers, which is why we get in new writers also. So it's a place where people get inspired. Aspiring writers come there, they get really inspired, and they want to emulate, others, and want to do things. They get to meet their favorite authors, and that whole synergy, it's a creative hub that is so satisfying. You feel like you have achieved, I feel I'm really a Prabhu at that point. I become a Prabhu.
Absolutely.
I feel I'm really Prabhu. I can enable this in my own little way, through whatever troubles, I can make this happen. And that itself is so satisfying. So I think these are the reasons why I do it.
Manjari, I think I will be speaking for a lot of authors who have gone to the Pune Literature Festival when I say we are so grateful that you're doing it every year, because you're absolutely right. The creative synergy at Pune is fantastic. It really, really inspires all of us, as writers. And, where we meet readers and readers come and talk to us. It's wonderful. I mean, my experience of it has been beautiful. I really, really loved it,
Thank you.
Thank you so much, actually. I think I will be speaking for all the authors who have been to your...
I'm so glad.
It is a wonderful, wonderful festival. And all your hard work, of course. And we enjoy it all.
Not just me, my team who supports me, my
team.
family. I wouldn't do this without my family and my husband and, my sister's mom and all. They are there for me every single time. So yes, but since you said about meeting, it's also where most friendships have been formed. I know that lifelong friendships have been formed at PILF, even professional friendships. So I think it's a kind of there are so many biggies who have launched their book first at PILF and after that gone to 20 festivals. They write back to me saying, we started a journey at PILF, their first book ever. And I feel so happy because, that's the whole point, the purpose of the festival, for people to start their journeys. And I think I'm glad it's helping people.
And what I also love is that you involve a lot of young people, who help out as volunteers. And when I was there, I found so many of them were using the festival as a project. They were taking films, they were taking interviews, and they said, okay, this is all project that we are doing for our, for our own studies. And that is an excellent way of children to learn, how young adults would learn to socialize, to talk to people, to take interviews. I mean, you're not just doing it for the authors, you're also doing it for that young generation. It's beautiful.
Many people benefit from it. Many people, actually.
Absolutely. And now, after whatever you said, you have started a new festival, which is the International Festival of Spiritual India, Yeah, and humanity and wisdom. And it has been going on for the last 2 years.
Yeah.
I want to ask you something different.
Mm.
Can you relate one incident during that festival which is significantly unspiritual?
I, uh, I don't think so. I can tell you, before I give you a non-spiritual experience, let me tell you the spiritual part of it.
Okay,
We started this festival because we felt, I mean, in 2013, when we started off with PILF, we always wanted to introduce a spiritual stream in it. But somehow, we could just manage a couple of sessions and all that. Around last 2 years ago, we decided it was really time, because my mom is into astrology, and we are all into a little spirituality in a very different, like we take care of street dogs and all that. So we felt that it was now time, considering what's happening in society, to introduce a festival which is going to meet the emotional needs of people. And that is why International Festival of Spiritual India was begun, because we thought we needed to help people find their path in life, whether people are confused, whether they're ill, whatever. We wanted to provide them with tools to live life in a day-to-day manner, to find their paths in life, to find their goals in life, and to find the direction in life. That is why the festival was begun. Okay. And then within the festival, there is a place called the Bodhi One. That's like a confession chamber. We've created a confession like on the lawn, and it's completely enclosed. And inside the Bodhi One, there are articles and stuff kept where you can unleash your emotions in different ways, including burning them, affirmation. There are mirrors. We've created that whole thing. You won't believe it, Shrutapa. There are people who used to go in a line one after the other into the Bodhi One, and we could hear people sobbing. It was like such a relief for them, and this whole emotional outburst that they used to have inside. Of course, we always respected the privacy, and nobody ever went there. There were only volunteers standing out. But that's how much of an impact the festival had on some people. They actually used that Bodhi One. So we knew, if I knew that I wanted to do a festival, when this happened, I knew it was the right thing to do. And you won't believe it. I put in, my own money to do this festival in the first 2 years. And it was, stupid of me. I don't know, some call me stupid, some call me foolish, but no one can ever call me heartless or selfish.
No, okay? I would call you very wise. I will call you very wise. No.
Now I come to the non-spiritual part of it. Not during the festival, but when we went to sponsors to ask for money for this festival, which we felt was the need of the hour. You won't believe it. No one came forward. Not even, one would say there are so many spiritual organizations in India itself. They have lots of money. There's no need to, whatever. Forget sponsoring anything. They don't even do their own travel and stay. Okay. So spirituality is a business today. Okay. And people who really, it's a very sad truth. And that's the most non-spiritual experience of this festival, that money is call it an energy exchange that they call it, or whatever, but it's become a business today. And if it's a business, it's good for the benefit of people. But when you see that there's a festival happening which is doing this on a larger level, and people are putting in their own money to do this, you need to step forward. Spirituality is not only meditation. There are ways and ways of being spiritual, and it's all coming under one roof. You need to step forward. So I felt, that finding funds for this festival was the most unsavory experience of my life, of this festival. So I think that's the non-spiritual part that I would like to mention.
I hope people are listening. I really hope they're listening.
I hope they're listening. I hope they step forward and they come forward.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. I hope they're listening.
Yeah.
You're also a very keen animal activist, right? Now, celebrities like Joe Biden and Sandra Bullock have been rescuing and adopting animals. And during this pandemic, there have been pets which have been abandoned and even killed, apparently, I've heard. And everybody says that this pandemic is supposed to be a lesson for all of us to respect nature's gifts rather than destroying. Do you have, what ideas can you, I would love to know your ideas on how we can make humanity more sensitive to nature's gifts.
Shrutapa, you've stoked the spiritual side in me. I might go on talking. You'll have to stop in. You'll have to stop in
between.
Please
go on. We're loving listening to you. You've seen the comments which are coming. People love listening to you. Please go on.
Okay. So, firstly, I don't like to call myself an animal activist. I like to call myself an animal lover. Okay, because there's a Thank you, Priya. So I like to call myself an animal lover. Secondly, well, when you talk about humanity and you talk about this earth and nature, I feel humanity is actually humans in unity for a humane action. That's how I look
Wow.
at it. That's what humanity is. But how do you have all humans in unity looking in one direction? And how do you make them understand that we are all a part of this whole universe? We are not separate from the trees. We are the energy that made the trees and the animals is the same energy that's within us. How do
True.
you bring about this kind of an awareness in human beings? Okay, for that, well, there are ways. Firstly, to be aware of this, you have to be a little more aware. Okay, you can't just sit in your house and whatever. I don't want to comment on eating habits and all that, but honestly, to be aware of what's happening around you, you need to be more aware. And how can you be more aware and more conscious? Conscious is the word I want to use. How can you be more conscious? Well, because that's the only way you will understand that you're connected to the universe in different ways. And then you can talk about humanity, because then all the humans will be in unity for one goal. Okay. Now I look at it in two ways, or actually three ways. Firstly, of course, meditation. We all know that meditation is an important part. It takes you within, you get spiritually enlightened and all that happen. But there's also another way of doing this, and that is being in sync with nature. What is being in sync with nature? In sync with nature in a humane way, like a day-to-day interaction with it. I don't mean that you go, the conversation, you go to a tree and you chop it little by little every day and you say, I'm interacting with it. That's not what I mean. I mean in a humane manner. So how can you live in a city or live in a place where there are barely any trees? Probably, I don't know. How can you interact, with nature daily and be in sync with them? Well, there's a simple way. You interact with the dogs in your street, or the dogs around. You inculcate this compassion and love in your life. Okay. And because I firmly believe that love and compassion are the only two things that are going to help us survive in this world. There's nothing else in this world above love and compassion. And love and compassion together are going to help us being humans in unity, leading to humanity. Okay, it's a very simple mathematics in my head. But how can we inculcate the in sync part of it into human beings? I think you should start with children. Okay, because adults are already too smart, too knowledgeable, too intelligent. They don't need to hear anything from any one of us. They
Too
know
much
everything.
baggage.
Too much baggage. And even if they know, probably they can't do anything about it. So why not target children? Okay, because like I said, those are the ones, they're the fresh ones, they're clean slates. What you give them is going to be carried forward. So I feel that meditation practices, making it fun, understanding meditation should be all introduced at a school level. Apart from that, community service. I mean, for dogs, I'm not talking about human beings. We already have a lot of people working for human beings. For the dogs, going out in groups, like help groups, helping the dogs in the street, giving them food, treating them, all this will definitely increase your level of consciousness. And once you are conscious, you're automatically aware that everything that's happening around you is a part of you. You're not separate from it. And for you to survive, the universe has already put everything in place. All you have to see is what is there in place. And that's the nature around you. Earth will survive, you will survive, and you're both connected. So based on this, I am coming out with a book soon. I don't know if I should talk about it. If Dipankar will allow me, I'm going to talk about this. I have a philosophy called the doctrine of peace.
Wow.
It's like a doctrine. It's called the doctrine of peace. I firmly believe, that if you serve dogs, okay, dogs are the most loving companions you'll ever have. They are DOG backwards GOD, and there's no doubt about it. There is no other animal in close circuit with us. Like, there are of course domesticated animals around us, but the dog is a very special one. He knows, he understands you, he communicates with you, he shows you unconditional love. And when you use this unconditional love in your life, okay, it seeps into your life. You cannot but not reciprocate. When it seeps into your life, this unconditionality, it seeps into your children, it seeps into your neighbors, it seeps into your society, it seeps into your state, it seeps into your country, it seeps into the world. So if each one of us interacts with dogs, the doctrine of peace is going to unfold like manifold snowballing effect in the world, and we will have peace in the world. We will know that nature and we are connected. We will know that we are all here for love and compassion, and love and compassion is the only answer to all our issues in the world.
Thank you so much, Manjari. Really, what you said makes so much sense.
Thank you.
Even if you're saying that this is spirituality, it's not abstract at all. It's really makes sense that you have to act compassionately, and then you will feel, it is like a reflection which comes back to you, and you feel the compassion inside you.
The satisfaction that you will get the moment you serve dogs. The dogs are helpless. When you work for children, when you work for old people, when you work for ill people, you get something in return. Sometimes you get, verbal thanks. Sometimes you earn votes. Sometimes you become rich because you get funds. There's nothing that you get back from a dog except a wagging tail and a lick on your face. And that is unconditional service. And unconditional service and unconditional love together is dynamite. It's dynamite for peace.
Absolutely. I completely agree, because like you, I am also a dog lover. I love dogs. So
I'm glad.
And I do feel, I feel what you say. There is a connection, there is a connection. I mean, I may not even know the dog on the street, but the dog will behave in such a way that I know that the dog is like, he's acknowledging me.
He will never forget you. He will never forget you. He will be so grateful for you and for what you've done for him. You do something for a human being, he's never grateful. He's in fact going to put a khanjar in your back. Put a khanjar in your back. He'll betray you. Human beings betray each other like, lunch, breakfast and dinner. It's a very common thing to betray people. I might help somebody and that person will turn around and talk behind my back. That's human nature. You find a dog doing that, they're the purest souls ever. And if you want to be pure and if you want purity around you, you have to associate with purity. It's very simple. We just have to see it in a conscious way.
I love it. And thank you so much. Manjari, you have given us so much time. I mean, we were thinking of half an hour, but you've given us so much time. And I mean, I think nobody has thought how time has passed. It was a wonderful talking to you, Manjari. Thank you so much. And very good evening to you, and take care, and a very good evening to all the viewers. Thank you so much for being with us, for being with Bistro Buzz. And Manjari, thank you so much. It was just, I can't explain. It was like inexplicable.
Thank you, Shutapa. It was a pleasure for me talking to you too. I think any dog lover is my friend forever, for life. So, I mean, I'm very partial to dog lovers, to animal lovers, basically. So it was great talking to you. Thank you for inviting me. It was really quite a privilege. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Manjari. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, and have a good evening. Thank you.